Thank you for joining Greene Tweed's Industrial 2026 Highlights. My name is Melissa Ruemmler, and I'm a market analyst here at Greene Tweed. Joining me today is Greg Gedney, Greene Tweed's Business Development Manager for Industrial Markets, and we're going to talk about the so-called nuclear renaissance going on in the nuclear industry lately.
Hi, everyone.
So, Greg, things have gotten pretty interesting in nuclear these days. It's kind of surprising, given that really not too long ago, nuclear was considered a mature, staid, kind of boring industry. In fact, many nuclear plants were being closed due to both expense and stigma related to past safety events. But in the last few years, we've really been seeing a resurgence. Have you been seeing that too?
Absolutely. In fact, in the last few months, I've had the opportunity to attend 3 nuclear-based conferences around valve users, as well as feed water system reliability, and the World Nuclear Exhibition in France. And at those conferences, I'm seeing a unprecedented, I would say, in the last decade or two, enthusiasm around it. And that goes throughout the entire industry, from the equipment manufacturers supplying for many years into the nuclear industry, to the utilities themselves, the end users in the nuclear industry, as well as governmental and research organizations. There's really a lot going on, and it's a very exciting time to be involved in investing into the nuclear industry.
That's really interesting. What do you think is driving that?
It's really related to global efforts around decarbonization, climate change, and sustainability. Electrification and the growth of data centers is driving ever-increasing demand for electricity. But generating electricity with fossil fuels runs counter to that decarbonization goals of electrification. Nuclear is unusual in that way. While it's technically not a renewable power source, it is a non-emitting power source. There's no carbon involved. And while we're still solving some of the challenges with renewables like energy storage, nuclear is a very well-proven and very safe technology. Some have called nuclear a bridge technology between traditional fossil fuel-based power generation and renewables. But nuclear is making advances of its own, not just filling gaps with the same old technology.
Well, that's certainly true. In fact, nuclear provides nearly half of carbon-free electricity in the US right now. So while we're seeing activity in what we call conventional nuclear, that's basically the large-scale water-cooled plants that people are used to, there are other things happening beyond that, right?
That's right, Melissa. There's really 3 areas of growth that we're seeing in nuclear. The conventional nuclear industry that you described there, as well as small-scale nuclear reactors, also known as SMRs, and even much newer downhole nuclear technology. There's also work being done in nuclear fusion, which is a related technology, but that's a bit outside of the scope of what we're going to be talking about today. In conventional nuclear, we're seeing companies like Microsoft and Google investing in recommissioning closed plants, like the 3 Mile Island, and the contracting to buy 100% of the generated power to run their data centers, particularly those focused on AI. We're also seeing companies like EDF in France not only extend the lives of all their existing facilities, but contracting to build new ones. They've currently got plans to build 6 new reactors across 3 sites, and they have the plans for an additional 8 that are possible.
Wow, that's potentially 14 new reactors just in France. That's a level of activity we haven't seen in many years. So talk to me a little bit about small scale nuclear. That's something new and different compared to the conventional plants that we're familiar with. From what I've seen, there's an interest in these types of facilities from some pretty disparate entities. Everything from big tech for data centers, industrial plants for private power, remote locations, disaster response, and even individual municipalities.
Yeah, SMRs are, as the name would suggest, are both small, generally defined as generating capacities of less than 300 megawatts, and modular, meaning that the reactor is designed so that the system and components can be fabricated as modules in a factory. That can save substantial cost and time on large projects. Modularity means that the capacity can be increased as desired over time when need dictates and funding is available. Many of these reactors use water-cooled technologies similar to their conventional counterparts, but there are also multiple other technologies in the works. Currently, there are over 100 planned sites, though only a handful have been fully commissioned. And yes, often they're intended for private off-grid power generation. Part of what's driving the activity we're seeing is support from governments, especially in the US and Canada, to fast-track approvals. So we're seeing a lot of forward progress. There's also been a bit of activity in the US national laboratories in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Idaho, and universities like Penn State and Texas A&M, where there are robust testing facilities. Breakthroughs are being made in terms of safety, waste, the fuel technology, and the reactor designs themselves. There's some pretty interesting and exciting stuff going on technologically.
Wow, that is a lot. You also mentioned downhole nuclear. That's something I hadn't heard of until just a few weeks ago. Can you explain a little bit about that part?
Yeah, downhole is really in its infancy at this point. There's one company called Deep Fission that is putting the reactors into holes over 1 mile in the ground, which is intended to add to the safety and the containment of the nuclear reaction. Oil companies are getting involved since they have the expertise in drilling the holes for their oil wells. And we're also hearing significant interest from major pump manufacturers.
That is interesting. I'm curious to see how that turns out in the future. How does Greene Tweed fit into all of this, though?
Greene Tweed has a very long, over 30-year history in the nuclear industry, supplying components to pumps, mechanical seals, and valves in water-cooled nuclear reactors. For instance, we have composite parts and EPDM seals and equipment like cooling water pumps used by some of the leading nuclear power providers in the world. We've invested in a certification for PMUC, which is required in EDF units and being built in Europe, which is useful for our composite materials, which are going to be installed in those new plants mentioned earlier. Our materials increase the mean time between repair and can be relied on in can't-fail situations like the nuclear industry.
It's excellent to know that our materials are contributing to safety and reliability in this industry that's finding new life, decarbonizing our electricity generating capacity. Again, I'm really interested to see how this industry and Greene Tweed with it progress in nuclear. I think that's all the time we have today. It's been great speaking with you, Greg, and thanks for sharing your insights on the nuclear industry.
Great. Thanks, everyone.